What was the secret? How did you drive innovation at a company or an organization that has centuries of, hey, this is the way we've always done things. This is how we do it. How do you bring a new innovation and push them to change?
It is surprising when I look back on it. I think probably this pivotal moment for me was...
Today's guest is Skip McCormick. From the Naval Academy to Navy warships, then 17 years in the CIA, Skip McCormick has spent a lifetime at the intersection of national security and technology. Now, as CTO and founder of Angularis AI, he leads a powerhouse team delivering enterprise-grade AI governance and model risk management.
I have a few sayings. One is, if you're not cheating, you don't want to win bad enough. Now, I'm not advocating unethical cheating, right? That's not the point. It's like, if you're not taking advantage of every ethical opportunity that you can.
How important is traceability and transparency in what you're doing at Angularis?
It's essential, but it's not enough. Like, the AI is looking out for all of us. And to do that, you asked about how important is transparency. I think that's the key. When it makes a decision, can I open up that decision and say, how did we get to this decision? I want to be able to do that whenever there's a decision, enough till I get to the point where I say, I'm confident that this decision is going to be like the other ones I double clicked on and follow.
Is there something you look back on, hey, that was a mistake, but at least I learned something from it?
That's a dangerous question for me, because I've been told by a few people who became good friends over time that when they first worked with me, they thought I was...
Welcome to the Good Decisions podcast, the podcast about the pivotal choices shaping careers, technology, and the future of AI. I'm your host, Jay Combs, the VP of Marketing at ModelOP. In each episode of this podcast, we're going to sit down with leaders who have faced complex challenges, such as military officers turned technologists, data scientists navigating billion-dollar risks, AI pioneers who've had to choose between what's easy, what's right. We talk so much about AI and the technology and data, about making decisions at enterprises. We can sometimes give short thrift, or at least I think so, to the people behind all that who are ultimately making decisions and what drives them. So that's what's interesting to me, and that's what we're going to dive into in this podcast. So the people in this podcast, we're going to talk about how they make decisions and the moments that got them to be the leaders in AI today. And so for our very first episode, we couldn't have asked for a better guest. Skip McCormick, who's the CTO and founder of Angularis AI. He's made a career out of complex situations and good decisions, from joining the CIA after 9/11 to building supercomputer systems to fight terrorism, to leading AI risk governance at one of the world's largest and oldest financial institutions. He's now CTO at Angularis AI and helping enterprises navigate AI with speed, security, and integrity. So let's get into it. Welcome, Skip. How are you this morning?
Hi, Jay. I'm doing great. Thanks a lot. I'm very humbled by your introduction.
Yeah, fantastic.
I don't feel like I'm that remarkable. I just sort of played the cards as they were dealt to me.
Yeah, well, so let's get into that. That's what I kind of want to know, because it really is fascinating. Like, you started off at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. You served as a surface warfare officer. And I think you were, then you shifted to systems engineering and consulting. And then you developed a client list that I believe included the NSA, but correct me if I'm wrong there.
I did support the intelligence community quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously, 9/11 was a horrible and transformational event for the country and for many people. And you went from, I think, private practice there into the CIA, where you ended up serving 17 years as an intelligence officer, developing data science and supercomputers. Is that right?
Right, yeah. It was a super fun career. I was very, very, very fortunate.
Yeah, and then you went back to private business and served as the managing director of governance and metrics at the Bank of New York, which is over 240 years old at this point. And you helped innovate the firm's AI practice and led their AI risk and governance for their new artificial intelligence hub. And now you've become the CTO and founder of Angularis, which is where you created, I guess, it's enterprise grade managed services for the governance and innovation of AI models.
That's right.
So, like you said, how did you get there? I guess that's the question. Did you plan on doing both public and private service? Did you think you'd be a career military officer? As you look back, how did you get there? Is this surprising to you? Is it not surprising? What kind of shocks you the most about that journey?
It is surprising when I look back on it. I think probably the pivotal moment for me was I was 12 years old and my dad came home from work. He was a grocery store manager and he was all excited about one of his box boys was going to the military academy. And I didn't know what that was. My dad was like, this is like one of the best schools in the country. And I thought you had to like know somebody or be, family friends with a senator or a congressman, but it's all just merit based. And I was like, when you're 12 years old and your dad hung the moon, I'm like, well, that's what I'm going to do. And my dad looked at me and said, yeah, okay, but the Naval Academy is the one you want. And I was like, okay, whatever that is, that's what I want. So when you're 12, so I went to school the next day or two, and I went and saw the counselor and looked up the Naval Academy, and I wrote them a letter to ask for an application. And they sent it to me because I didn't tell them I was 12. I just asked for an application. And so I got this, IBM number 2 pencil form that, you fill out and you have to spell your name with, little dots and everything. If you're as old as me, you remember those forms. And I filled it out and I didn't have much to put on it because I was in grade school, but I now had the roadmap for what I needed to accomplish in junior high and high school. So I could check off all these things like, were you in the student government? Were you captain of a varsity sports teams? Were you an Eagle Scout? All of these things. And then there was forms for like, if you ever used any drugs, it basically said you don't have to complete the form or bother sending it in, right? And so when you're 12 going into junior high school, that was like a magic capability. I remember talking to my 7th grade math teacher, Mr. Mosley, and saying, Mr. Mosley, I need to take calculus my senior year in high school. And to do that, I have to get into Algebra 1 by 9th grade, which means I have to get A's in this course this year. Right. And he looked at me like, who, what? Right. But if a kid like that tells a teacher that you're basically giving the teacher permission to bust your butt if you're not doing well enough. I didn't tell him, give me an A. I told him, make sure that I know if I'm not doing enough to get the A. And so fast forward, I'm in high school. One of my best friends is like the school drug dealer. And we're riding the bus and he's talking about drugs. And I said, sounds great, but I can't do that because I want to go to the Naval Academy. If I do that even once, I'm excluded. And he was like, okay, that's cool. So I'm in high school in like a party and somebody's coming by trying to offer me marijuana. And the guy who sold him the marijuana comes here and says, don't give him that. He can't do that. He's going to the Naval Academy. Right. So after, if you share your dreams and your visions with other people, they sort of adopt it too, right? Unless you're a jerk. And I tried not to be a jerk. Yep. So once I had that sort of set up, then I kind of had to succeed because all my friends, were counting on me, right? So when I got into the Naval Academy, I felt like I succeeded. But I remember being there a few months. It's hard the first year. You probably know. I remember one day I went, oh no, now I'm going to be in the Navy. What am I going to do in the Navy? Right. My whole goal was just to get there. And I guess I wasn't 100% sure I'd make it. Right. And so now I'm there and then I have to decide what to do. And so, of course, everybody says, I want to be a jet pilot. Well, my eyes weren't good enough to be a jet pilot. So I ended up having to think about what to do. And I went surface line and went out and served the fleet out of a ship in Hawaii. And it was great because I was on a supply ship, which meant we went to sea all the time and we did our mission every day. And as a junior officer, that's the best, right? You're learning how to do your job. If you're on a combatant, you only get to do your mission if there's like fighting. Otherwise, it's all just practice and pretend. So anyway, that was kind of how it started. After being in the Navy and enjoying that, I finished my obligation plus another year, went into the reserves, and then went to Washington. My last couple years in the Navy, I actually wrote software. I had this neat opportunity to go build a Lisp code for AIS security, information security work at the Regional Data Automation Center in Hawaii. You just don't often get a job to do in the military what your schooling training was, right? It was just a frequent sort of opportunity. I loved it. I went to Washington, D.C. area and looked for a job in computer security. And this is like 92. It's all pretty new then. Yep. And, and
your degree at the Naval Academy was in computer science, correct?
Yeah, it was computer science. I was there in the first year they offered that degree, right? It was, they didn't even have it. Before that, you could take applied mathematics with an emphasis on computers, but that was the first year they offered computer science. And in fact, I was rich.
how did you select it? Like, why? Like, if it was that
I
new, I mean,
didn't
clearly,
select it. I selected
yeah.
English. I was an English major for
Ah,
my first year. And at the end of my first year, I was filling out the form to pick my courses for my second year. And I wanted to take Introduction to Computer Science because the programming courses that every plebe had to take were fun. And they were my easiest grades because I loved it. And my advisor was like, no, not computer science. You need to take Shakespeare and poetry. And, he's giving me the English lit courses.
at the Naval Academy, your
Yeah,
advisor said this.
yeah. And Commander Shank, he was a great advisor. And I said, well, I think knowing computers is going to be important as a naval officer. And he said, well, that's true. And then I said, all the papers I've submitted, the ones I got A's on were the ones I used the word processor to write. And this was an early word processor on a mainframe, right? Microsoft Word didn't even exist yet. I think Word Perfect or Word Star wasn't even out. So I was writing my papers on the mainframe, which would fix my spelling, and my handwriting was terrible and all that. And I said, look, when I submit my papers from the computer, I get an A because I'm a reasonably good writer. I'm just terrible at spelling and handwriting. And he said, well, that's true. And I said, but the ones I write in a blue book, I'm lucky to get a C because it's unreadable, and my spelling is atrocious. And don't ask me to spell atrocious, right? And he was like, okay, you have a point. So he said, but you have to take these courses anyway. So I went and I gave up my summer to take Shakespeare and I think poetry so that I would have the open electives to take Introduction to Computer Science. That's how much I loved it. And that course changed my world. The Introduction to Computer Science was taught by the Dean of Computer Science. Deans like to teach the early courses because it's a way to meet the new students, I guess.
And it was the first year of the program, right? Like, so it must have been a brand new dean.
Yeah. And the funny part was the first quarterly exam, there was one question on the exam. It was some logic question. And it had like this much space for the answer. And I answered in one line. And I was sure I got it wrong. It's like, I must not understand this question. And like the next class, I'm in there and he hands out everybody's exams graded except me. I thought, oh no, I'm in big trouble now. And he's going through and he gets to that question. He goes, there's one student in the class who answered this in an interesting way. And he put my exam up on the overhead projector, right? Back then they didn't have,
Yep.
And he said something like, this is the most efficient and most unique answer I've ever seen to this question. And then he explained it, right? And I was like, oh, wow, right? And the rest of the class is looking at me like, you suck up, and I'm like, well, I didn't know. Well, and so
what kind of question was it? Was like a short search or sort
some kind of
thing?
logic question where,
Yeah.
there's all the space to build truth tables, right? And I just wrote logical formula. And so after class, he handed me my exam and said, good job. And he said, come see me after classes today. I want to have you help me on my research. And I was like flabbergasted. And I said, Professor, that's awesome, but I don't think I can do that. I'm an English major. And he looked at me and he said, oh, well, come up after class and we'll change you to computer science. That's not a problem. Right? It wasn't even like, would you or do you want to? It was like, this is the right thing for you. So I remember going back to Commander Shank and saying, Commander, will you sign this? I'm going to change my degree to computer science. And he was like, why? And I told him, I said, the computers make a 2-grade difference in everything I do. I think that's where I want to be. And he said, that makes sense. And he signed it. And, from that point forward, but the funny part was I was a computer science major who had 4 semesters of German and Shakespeare and poetry. I had a whole year of English lit stuff. And my computer science peers didn't have any of that. And it's funny, with all the ChatGPT stuff happening now, all of that lit stuff turns out to be really, really relevant. It's like Steve Jobs did all of that kerning and font work, right? It's like, what are you doing? You're a computer nerd. It's like, well, it turned out that how it looks and how it reads and writes actually matter. And so for me, it's just dumb luck, I think. But it's funny. I'm glad you asked the question because I sort of forgot all about that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's dumb luck. I mean, at 12 years old, clearly you were very mission driven.
Oh,
and your parents weren't in the military, correct? Like you were the first to go in.
My dad was in the Air Force. That's where he met my mother in England. But he was enlisted, did a good job, and did his time and then got out, right? And he wasn't a career military thing. He wasn't. He had nothing against the military. He had a positive outlook on it, especially for a young person isn't sure what they do. I think military makes a lot of sense for a lot of people because it's like, go do something useful, learn how to be productive and how to sort of be part of a team. All those things can be an advantage. So
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, at 12 years old, I think it's a fairly unique, or if not really unique, to have like a very clear sense of mission and focus. So that's like one interesting thing to come out of here. But then also, it seems like you were also somewhat very logical and data driven. Like, hey, if my grades change this much, I should be doing this and ahead of time. And it's not that it doesn't, like, clearly you're still interested in the liberal arts and but also, hey, I'm really good at this. You following your passion as well. It's like, hey, I could go the path and kind of stick with what my superiors are, advising, but hey, I'm really good at this. Let me follow my passion and try something new. Like you said, you're the first class to do that. That's really risky and crazy, but from what you said, it sounds like, hey, you really enjoyed it, so you're going to try it. And you're at the intersection too of the liberal arts and technology and the military. So that crossover is really fascinating as well.
I think for me, it's fortunate timing, right? That this new thing happened, and I went for it, and you make the decision, then you just work to make that decision work out, right? It wasn't all easy. Some of those courses, the computer science courses, included heavy duty electrical engineering back then, and differential equations and a lot of math. Everybody at the academy studies engineering because you're going to be in the Navy, but the computer science major, they were still figuring out what it should be, and so they included a lot of electrical engineering material, and some of that stuff was mind bending. So somehow I muddled through.
There's so many aspects of computer science. It's not just programming. There's the hardware. There's the algorithms. It's such a cool. I was a computer science major as well at a liberal arts school, which was a little odd. It was a very small program.
We have a lot in common.
I can appreciate where you went.
And you probably saw that most of the computer science education wasn't just the classroom stuff. It was helping classmates with their programs, right? You'd have these assignments. You have to build some program that does X, and you'd go to the computer room because people didn't have personal computers, and you were in a room with a bunch of terminals attached to the mainframe, and you'd sit in there working, and a classmate would say, my program won't compile, or what's wrong? It's not working right. And so you'd get their printout and study it to see how they're solving their, that program. And then you could say, oh, here's what's wrong. You're using the wrong index, or you need a different loop, or stuff like that. When you're helping other people debug their programs, that's when you learn a ton of different ways to approach the same problem, right? And so, that was, looking back on it, the other students helped me learn computer science is really how that worked. Usually by then I was working on making my program, neater looking. It already worked, and then I like to do everything in as few loops as possible, just because it was a puzzle. So,
do you think that collaboration is changing now, like with just AI vibe programming and different things? Like, are people relying less on that collaboration to learn from each other, especially with a lot of remote work happening, or is that still a big part of what's going on?
I wonder. I hadn't thought about that, but I'm not sure if development works like it used to, where you write something and you're stuck and you ask a friend. I think a lot of programming now is you go to Grok or Perplexity or something, and you have it write your first version, right? And then you tweak that. And I don't know many programmers today who don't start with the first version that was written by AI. That's the normal way to begin. And why wouldn't you start that way, right? There's a whole bunch of sort of mundane stuff that needs to be done. I don't know. Some of these products, like I mentioned, I use Grok a lot, Perplexity a lot. Everybody uses ChatGPT, and the Meta ones, but they give you a pretty good starting point. When I'm done, what I wrote doesn't really resemble what I started with, but it's a lot easier than starting with a blank page.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, it's an interesting topic I think applies to writing as well. I know
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
some
Oh, yeah.
studies.
For writing, I use it for outlines. Like, what are my most common queries are, give me the top 7, bullet points with one paragraph on X, right? And with some of these tools like Grok, it'll give you that all reference to where it came from. If you just use that, you're in for trouble because it makes up things. But it's a really great starting point. I think that's probably different.
Yeah.
So I don't know if people go to their friends anymore for help debugging. That's kind of sad. I hadn't thought about
Yep.
that. I haven't gone to a friend for help for a long time. And I don't know
Yeah.
how a
It's always
professor
good to reach
does
out.
this anymore. Yeah. How does a professor teach programming these days? It's like, yeah, that's a challenge. So at this point, I think every paper submitted, the professor has to run it by ChatGPT to see if ChatGPT wrote it. There's a,
Yeah, I was listening to
is
some
it even
study on.
plagiarism?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, ton of questions that I think folks are trying to figure out. I did hear one study on writing, and they, asked, I think they tested the quality of papers written by AI. They had a bunch of students use AI to write a paper, and then a bunch of other ones just do it on their own. And I think as a whole, the quality of the generative AI papers were better quality, like just overall in terms of
Probably better
writing
outline and
style and
structure. Yeah.
everything, better outline, better structure. But the ones written by humans, they had higher peaks. Like the ones that were really good and more creative and more diversity of ideas, whereas ones with the AI had more similarity of ideas and concepts. So you might get the better structure, and overall it's a little better, but like the uniqueness and like pushing the ideas still comes from the human side, at least from this one study.
I agree. I remember probably 5 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, an interview with Elton John about the music industry, and he was ranting about now with all the modern technology, anybody can make any music they want, right? And it made him crazy, right? And I was like, well, that's kind of arrogant. And his point wasn't that. He was like, I spent my whole life mastering this field, and now people using computers can make something in a couple minutes that's
Yeah.
mediocre to good, right? It's not a creative genius thing that changes the world, but it's mediocre and good, and it frustrated him. I don't know how you feel about Elton John, but some of his music, was like, wow, you never heard anything like that before because it came out of his head. And now you can tell AI to make a song in the structure like Yellow Brick Road about cats riding on rainbows. And, a minute later, you have a pretty good production of a stupid song about cats on rainbows that sounds like...
Yeah, the Yellow Brick Road album is amazing and so unique, but so it's wild.
But I don't think ChatGPT would ever make a Bohemian Rhapsody. You know what I mean? That broke every norm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
Like those
peaks are, that truly original content, I think, is still so challenging and the most interesting.
But I think Freddie Mercury would use AI tools because he was into technology big time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He would use them.
I mean, going back, just like the word processors, and I know you've used that analogy on word processors related to AI governance in the past, but yeah, it's a tool. How do you use it to push the boundaries, do something original, not just something mediocre? I think is like the true power of what all this generative AI and other technologies can do. That's the right way to use it, not just to be mediocre.
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking of a lot of other things. In the 90s, I bought a software product called Band in a Box. Have you ever heard of that? I'm a musician, and I was learning to play bass guitar. And, there's a lot of things bass guitarists do that isn't obvious, but Band in a Box would add a bass and a guitar and a piano and drums, and you just give it chords and tell it what style, and then it would make music. And then you could look at the music and see what the bass player was playing. And I remember looking at that and learning from that. And that's like, oh, this is how you do bass for a samba, or this is how you do bass for a rumba or for, hard rock or whatever. And you could see it. And it was, Band of Box is giving you the standard, basic, mundane, boring stuff. But that was what I needed to learn. And so, yeah, so even at that point, we wouldn't have called that AI, but
Yeah.
computer generated music from chords. And
No, I mean, just so I mean, the concept of tab and then tool, like now I go on my, like, also like similar thing. Like I've used tool, like, YouTube or
yes,
the tab programs that translate music into tab automatically. Like it's incredible, right? Back in the day, you just had to like put on the record or the tape or whatever, the CD, and just rewind it and figure it out and transcribe it yourself. And now it's done so quickly. Were you playing bass in the Navy, or were you learning back then? And is that part of your life back then?
I was in the church's worship team at Pearl Harbor Station. My wife is a singer, and I would like to spend time with my wife, so I joined with her just so we could do stuff together. And we found a drummer, and she would join, but she would only join if there was a bass player because she wasn't that confident. And we couldn't find a bass player, so I went to the guitar store and I bought this. I didn't have a lot of money, and I bought a bass guitar that was taken apart in a 5-gallon bucket, and I took it home and put it together and soldered it together. And I said, how hard is it to play Roots and Fists? And that was when I started playing bass, and it was just so we could have a drummer. But I did just like you said, you're listening and trying to figure it out, and I could play a few things, right? But ended up being pretty fun. I'm not a great bassist now, but I can play, whatever I need to.
Yeah,
So
that's so cool.
when when people ask me how should I learn guitar, I tell them learning bass guitar is easier because the strings are really fat and they won't hurt your fingers.
Yeah, yeah, you can start with 4 of them. It's easy.
Yes, that too, and you only play one at a time.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, yeah, back to Hawaii. When as a surface warfare officer, like, were you using your computer science degree in that program? What does a surface warfare officer do?
The Navy was obviously there was computers used in the Navy in weapon systems and things like that. The Navy's been using computers, physical computers since before World War II. I mean, it's really incredible. If you look at targeting system, was differential hardware computers that would like aim the gun that based upon range and bearing to the other ship and all this stuff, so that you could put a round where the other ship is going to be with both ships in motion, right? It's complicated things, and the computers were like gears and cogs and stuff. If that kind of stuff fascinates you, it's a really worthwhile thing, and there's a bunch of YouTube videos you can watch about it. So computers were not new to the Navy, but personal computers was kind of a new thing. And I remember our Captain Egan was kind of forward thinking, and he used some of the ship's resources to buy a few laptops for the officers. So these were all, early Zenith laptops. They were, LCD, black and white displays, and they probably had like 500K of memory. It was very early. And you got the computer, and you got like a one of those thermal printers with it, so you could print out. And I remember using that computer to automate a lot of my junior officer duties, right? Inventories for supplies. You had to write all these reports. You had to write fitness reports for your division and stuff like that. So I used the computer increasingly a lot, right? It really helped me get things going. I remember helping some of the other officers with it. They're like, how did you do that? And I would show them and, bring them a floppy disk with my WordStar, template for a fitness report kind of thing on it. And I think that's why the captain recommended me for the next job at the Naval Regional Data Automation Center, which isn't the typical next step for a surface line officer. But he saw that that was sort of where I could do the most, and I'm glad he did. He did me a big favor.
Yeah, it seemed like you had some really good mentors and leaders, kind of helping you, not necessarily like pushing you down this path, but opening those doors, giving bringing you a laptop. How did you see technology different than your classmates at that time, that who maybe went more traditional military routes or became, career officers?
I guess I saw it as an advantage, right? It's like I can do this job faster and better with this computer than I could without it, right? And so I'm always, I have a few sayings. One is, if you're not cheating, you don't want to win bad enough, right? It's like there's, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah. No, I'm not advocating unethical cheating, right? That's not the point. It's like if you're not taking advantage of every ethical opportunity that you can, right? And so there was that, and it was kind of an early stage too. They were putting Novell networks on ships, right? They didn't have networks, and the ships had to do it with fiber optic, and this is like 1991, right? And fiber optic was really expensive, but ships can't add a bunch of wiring because it could give the ship away in an MCOM sense if the enemy ship is scanning the spectrum to find you, and you have a bunch of Ethernet activity going on, that could give your ship away when you're trying to hide. So they did everything optical back then, and it was, I don't know if you remember all the Novell stuff, but that was kind of the beginning of local area networking. And so I had a chance to sort of be in the center of that. I often wondered, when I got to the NARDAC, they offered me a chance to work on the computer security team or the networking team. And I chose the security one because there was a chance to do some programming. And I often thought maybe I should have chosen the networking one because that was a more immediately marketable skill, right? There wasn't a lot of call for Lisp programmers. But to this day, I still write code in my head using Lisp, even if I'm writing in Java or C or Python. I think in Lisp because that's how I learned. So it's
all
not
those, you like all those parentheses, like parenthesis, parenthesis, parenthesis.
Yeah. And I love recursion. It's like the best of all most challenges puzzle wise. But I think it worked out because I still had to learn all the networking stuff, right? That came anyway.
Very, very cool.
So, but you mentioned something about I was fortunate to have leaders, and I think that really was a blessing, and it's something I'd like to emphasize going forward. Is I've told people I work with, they say you should never say this. I say I'm a pretty good leader, but a really bad manager, right? And they're like, don't ever say that, right? It's like, no, it's actually self-awareness, and by what I mean is I'm not like a bad manager in terms that I don't care. It's like I care so much about the people who work for me that I don't want to be their manager because I won't do as good a job as they need me to do. So I try very hard to identify like a chief of staff on my team whenever I can and say, look, you're going to manage the team and I'm going to lead it and lead you. But you have to actually let them manage. You actually have to give them the budget and let them make the decisions. Otherwise, it's no fun for them. But I've always viewed management is very, very important for the people being managed. It has to be good. But I think leadership is more important. And it's, hear this trite thing about leadership's more important than management. No, they're both really important. And so playing to my strength, leading is there was a psych professor at the academy who said leadership and manipulation are identical except for the motive. Right. And I've thought long and hard about that. In fact, I remember telling my son that, and he said, not true, Dad, because if you feel manipulated, it still feels like manipulation. Right. So you have leadership is leadership is getting people to do the things they should for everyone's benefit, including their own, where manipulation is getting them to do the thing that helps you. And I think
that's
success,
inspiration versus manipulation there.
And ModelOP has a very good leader. A couple of them, your founder and Stuart and Pete. Those are things I like about them the most. Is they spend a lot of cycles on the leadership part, and you're a beneficiary of that. I'm assuming. So
I am. I definitely am. Yeah, and then how would you classify your leadership style? I mean, first of all, I love the self-awareness. Like I think it's so critical in when you have leaders or managers that aren't self-aware, can't reflect on what they're doing, how they're influencing others. Like that's not a good situation. But it seems like you've had leaders that were always self-aware. I mean, not always, but like from the examples you gave, like trying to they bent there, like, hey, maybe their position was, hey, English was way better to do, but you know what? This makes sense. Like, let me reflect on this and guide this person the right way, not manipulate them, but lead them.
Right.
How would you describe your leadership style?
Well, for me, I don't like to be micromanaged, right? And I think that's common with the more ADD-ish kind of engineers. It's like, tell me what the puzzle is, tell me what the problem is, and tell me what the resources are to solve it. Give me an impossible deadline. That's okay, right? And then let me try to solve it and be there so I can bounce ideas off of you, and I can, bring you some like challenges, like, I need more twine here, or how do I do this? But don't tell me to do it the way you would do it, or don't make me do it the way you would do it. Tell me the way you would do it. That's good input, but don't expect me to do it exactly your way. And maybe that's why I like the AI tools. You go to Grok and ask it for help. You don't say, "Tell me how to do this." You're saying, "Tell me a way to do this," right? And then you see that and you go, okay. And then you work, you sort of riff on that. That's the kind of leadership I respond best to, and that's the kind of leadership I try to apply. It doesn't work for everybody, though. I've had employees who needed a lot more direct instruction. And sometimes they're very good, but I'm not the right leader for them. So if I could pick somebody on the team for them to report to, who will tell them, now do A, now do B, now do C, sometimes that's great. But if they're reporting to me and they're expecting me to tell them what the next thing is, both of us end up frustrated.
And sometimes you don't know what the next thing is supposed to be, and even like a bigger context, right? Like, so
it's like, try something.
So after you left the Navy, you were in private, I think you were a defense contractor for a while, and then
I ended up at MITRE, which is a system engineering company. That's where I learned to be a professional systems engineer. I was sort of, seat of the pants engineer up to that point. But at MITRE, it's proper system engineering with documentation and plans and structure. Yep. And I had to learn all those things to survive there. But it's funny, I remember in the interview, I was interviewing with Ron Zahavi, who is a well-known author and a technologist. And he's interviewing me for this job. And at the end of the interview, everything's good. And he asked me the sort of question that you always have to ask, like, "Oh, do you have any questions for me, young man?" And most times in interviews, you're just like, "Oh, no, not really." But I actually did. I said, "What are the three most important things I need to do to get to where you are?" Right? That was my question. And it was kind of like, "How do I get your job?" Right? And he slept back and he actually gave me the answer. He said, "At MITRE, you need to be the program manager for a well-known program. You need to run a conference, and you need to write a book." Right? So if you do those three things, you'll succeed here. And I was like, okay. So when I got the job, that became sort of my next mission. And so I was hired for a project to run. That came with the job. And then I said, I need to write a book. So I was like in a hunt for what book could I write? And I was at or Object World Conference, or I think Object World Conference in San Francisco. And I sat in one of the sessions by a guy named, I'll think of his name in a minute, Michael Ackroyd. And he had this concept of anti-patterns, right? I didn't think of anti-patterns. That's where I got the idea. Design patterns was a big thing. And he was sort of a counter culture guy, right? And so he said, design patterns are about, here's the pattern for solving certain kinds of problems. And he said, these are patterns where I see people applying things and the consequences are worse than the benefits, right? And he outlined maybe three, what he called anti-patterns in that session. I was like, this is brilliant, right? So I went up to him after the session and I said, I love this. Are you going to write a book about it? He said, well, a lot of people said I should, but I don't have time to write a book. And I said, I'll write the book with you, right? I'll do all the work. I love this, and I'll help you write the book. And I just need you to collaborate with me to make sure I'm not getting it wrong. And he agreed. And so I went out on the floor where all of the vendors were later, and there was a floor by Wiley, the book publisher. And there was a lady there who ended up, I didn't know, but she was one of the senior editors, and she was trying to build their computer science book sort of library. And I went up and I told her that. I said, I just got Michael Ackroyd to agree to collaborate on a book. We're going to write the anti-patterns book. And she said, we want to publish that book. And I was like, really? She said, yeah. And so, how often does that happen where you want to write a book and before you even do an outline, you have a publisher that wants to publish it. And so I was like, okay, cool. So I started an outline and I emailed Michael and I never got a reply from him. And there was another PhD at MITRE, a good friend of mine, Tom Mowbray, who I talked to. I said, you know, Michael? He said, yeah. And I said, he's not replying to my emails. And so he said, I'll send him a note. So I gave him the note and he sent it, still no reply. And I said, what do we do, Tom? And he said, well, we don't need him. Why don't we collaborate on the book? I was like, you're already a famous author. He said, no, this is a really great idea. We should write the book. And so we ended up with 4 of us and we wrote that book. We acknowledged Michael. We never claimed to invent the idea. We just, but that book ended up being very, very popular, not just because of the topic, but because I have a wry sense of humor. So I did all the comics and made everything I could interesting to read by making it funny, because there's a lot of stories in there about failure, which who doesn't like reading about? It was like an early Dilbert. In fact, we licensed 2 Dilbert comics in that book, and this is before Dilbert was even that big of a deal. Yeah. So the book was surprisingly successful, and that's how that got started. And it was right. The project I was running ended up. I ran a conference. I wrote a book, and next thing you know, I got promoted at MITRE. And it's another thing. Just find the formula and follow it.
Yeah. And so like anti-patterns is about recurring failures or patterns of failure in software development.
It's the things that seem like the right answer, but actually it's not the right answer. You have to refactor it. But if you do this, you're going to end up worse than when you started. And the refactored solution is what makes it an anti-pattern. It's like, we're not just complaining. It's like, change how you're doing it to get to the good outcome. And that's the refactored solution. That's an important part of the anti-pattern.
So with refactoring a solution or an idea that maybe, like you said, the bad consequences outweigh the benefits. Now that you're in data science and AI, are there lessons there from the failures in software development or refactoring software that apply now with AI? Yes. Or is it exponentially more dangerous now with AI? Or what are some of the lessons that you can share from your current work?
I don't know if I would say exponential, but it might be. There's a bunch of new anti-patterns that are obvious, when you look at it. And I'm too lazy to write that book right now, but I think there's a book there, like, AI anti-patterns, right? Here's what you think you should do, but here's what will happen. I don't know if we're ready to write the book because I don't know all the refactored solutions yet, right? Part of it is not just saying this leads to a bad result, but it's only helpful if you can steer them towards a better result by refactoring. But I do see it a lot. And it's funny, when I got to Bank of New York Mellon, I remember going to some of the engineering meetings and discussions. And in the meetings, they were talking about anti-patterns, right? They're like, we need to avoid this anti-pattern, that anti-pattern. And I remember going, wow, this is so cool. They are talking about anti-patterns as well. But I don't think all the people who worked there knew I was one of the co-authors of the original book. And so I had books on my shelf, including that book. And one of the other a real Java champion, a high-end developer, really skilled, came by and he's talking at my desk and he pointed to my book and he said, oh, that's my favorite book. And I thought he was just kissing me up, right? He's like, oh, he's telling me he loves my book. And I was like, really? What do you like about it? And he's saying, it's just so practical, whatever it was he said. And I said, well, thanks. And he said, what do you mean, thanks? And then he looked again at the authors and he went, wait a minute, that's you? And I said, well, yeah. And he was like, what? Right? So he didn't know that I was one of the co-authors. And he was being honest that book. And I found a lot of software developers really got a lot out of the anti-patterns book, especially the first one, because it sort of spoke to them, right? They're like, yeah, that's what I think of doing. And then they read the anti-pattern and they go, oh, I need to do a little bit differently. So.
Yep. And the antipatterns.com is still up. And your name on there is Hayes McCormick.
Yes.
The third. And the picture of you on there is pretty spectacular.
A lot younger,
so anybody listening, I suggest you go check it out.
Mr. Pointy Finger, yes.
Speaking of, how did you go from Hayes to Skip? That's a good question.
My mother gave me that nickname as an infant in the crib when my grandmother started calling me brother. I was in this little sailor suit. I don't remember it. I was only a few months old, but my grandmother started calling me brother. My mother said she had this flash that, oh, if he's called brother and he gets a sibling, he's going to become Bubba, and I don't want a son named Bubba. So she looked at me. I had a sailor suit on, and she said, his name is Skipper. And so that was when I got the name. Had nothing to do with Hayes. It was just a defensive maneuver to prevent me from being Bubba.
You definitely had a destiny for the ocean lifestyle
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Navy for sure. But thinking about like refactoring, you've refactored your careers.
Yeah, I
Naval
changed careers
Academy,
several times. Yeah.
private business, CIA, back to private business. What drove you want to go into the CIA after 9/11? And then after 17 years there, what
Yeah.
made you decide, hey, it's time to leave. It's time to go back to private business?
Well, CIA was another huge opportunity. I was at MITRE. I supported the agency as a contractor, and then when I left MITRE and went out on my own as a consultant, they kept me as a consultant, and so I worked as a consultant. And CIA was one of my clients, and I think I was helping them transition from C to Java and doing some other things like that. And then 9/11 happened, and some friends of mine and I, we sat down and we put together a proposal for some things that the agency could do to help with that war on terror. And I put together a slide deck and met with my COTAR. That's the government speak for Contracting Officers Technical Representative, I think. And I gave him the slide deck and I said, here's something I think we could do. And he looked at it and he said, you can't do that as a contract. You'd have to be an actual intelligence officer. And I was like, oh. So I said, okay. And he's like, okay, what do you mean? I said, well, this is important. We're at war. I'm willing to do that. And he said, intelligence officers don't make as much money as contractors, right? You'll be taking a big cut in pay. And I was like, okay, I can handle that. Who didn't want to have a chance to help, right? When that happened, I don't know if you remember how you felt, but you're really angry and you want to do something to protect, your loved ones and to sort of get back at the attackers. And that was what I had in mind. And so he said, if you're serious, I'm hiring a lot right now. And I said, I'm serious. So we left from that lunch meeting and went right downstairs to the HR office and I applied right there. And, sort of that spur of the moment thing. That was, I want to say, late September, early November. It's pretty close after 9/11. And then, there's a lot of vetting that goes on. So I didn't start until April, but, I got hired and I
April 2002?
Yeah. I still remember
2002.
Yeah. I still remember sitting in the hiring session at headquarters where you take the oath and they give you your blue badge. And it was such a proud moment. It was just awesome. I was like, wow. Because if you work there, you get an appreciation for the amazing caliber of skill there, that some of the most talented people I've ever known work there, and they get very little recognition, don't want it, don't want to be known, because they're causing harm to bad people who might try to harm them back, right? So it's a very secret business for good reason. I was lucky that somebody needs to be overt who can talk to industry and make that bridge happen. And so, there's a risk doing that, but it was good. And so, for the next 17 years, we called it big data analytics. We were building the first supercomputers that the agency designed for text, right? Not for, numerical, processing, and combining data from systems that couldn't be combined before because they were already maxed out and couldn't get any bigger. And, the system put things together that we couldn't see before. It's like when you're fighting an enemy that doesn't believe you can see them and you can see them, it's the best advantage there is, right? It's like, how did you know that? And when we could put people on the map and say, here's where they're going to be. And then the real heroes who put their life on the line, go there and meet them and get them. When they call you back and say, yeah, that's where they were, we got them, that's the best feeling in the world, right? There's a lot of angst while you're waiting, but that was awesome. And then I got to follow the software we built into the counterterrorism center itself, and I felt like I was part of the most elite team ever. It was a wonderful place to work, and immense responsibility. You feel like you can never do enough.
So it's high consequence, right? You're dealing with big data analytics, high consequence. If something goes right or something goes wrong. And I imagine you're dealing with
Irreversible consequences.
intelligent,
Yep.
irreversible consequences, but you're trying to put together probably imperfect data, ambiguous information.
Yes.
And I know in the tech world where, consumer tech or things where people are saying, hey, move quickly, break things, right? And there's validity to that. Let's not wait for perfection. Let's keep moving, right?
It's true.
How do you manage, especially in high consequence environments like healthcare, financial services, the intelligence community? How do you balance managing uncertainty and managing perfection, trying to move quickly, but making sure that you're giving the right deference to those high consequences? How do you manage those two different things or balance them?
It's a tough one, and I had some excellent mentors. There's a gentleman named Jeff Jonas, who's the CEO of a company called Sensing. At the time, he had a company out of Las Vegas that was helping casinos catch cheaters. And In-Q-Tel invested in him, and we leveraged his technology. But his huge contribution was teaching me about entity disambiguation and how can you figure out who's who in a world where they're trying to fool you and they're trying not to be disambiguated, and the data has mistakes in it. In fact, that I just was talking about this morning. If your data hygiene takes out all the errors before you put it into your correlation system, you might be removing the signal, right? The old garbage in, garbage out. Sometimes the garbage is the signal. And in the cases where people are committing fraud, they have patterns for their fraud. They'll change 3s to 6s or 5s to, it's like things they can do that if they're caught, they can explain it away as, oh, I'm dyslexic, or, oh, that I didn't write that clearly, because they, but if you fix those, if you go, this zip code doesn't go with this city and state, and you just fix it, the classic data hygiene, you lose that signal. And so Jeff taught you never change the source data, you annotate it. And that led to something we call dynamic metadata, where you take the data as is, you preserve it as is, and then when you do your hygiene, you add more data. You say, I think the zip code is this, right? And you know when you thought that and why, but you still have the original one, right? These are really simple examples of more complicated things. So that ended up being very important, but we needed supercomputers to deal with the amount of information. And at some point, we had so much metadata that we didn't have room for all the data, right? And so, you'd have identifiers like phone numbers or something, and every phone number had a bunch of data about where it came from, what your responsibilities are for protecting it, what its sensitivity is, what its confidence is, all this other metadata that was essential for making some kind of a conclusion. And we would add that to it because you can never separate the metadata from the data and then be confident in your answers. And everything you answer, you have to be able to walk the dog backwards to why you thought that. And so we said we need to get the metadata out of the supercomputer, but we need to preserve it. So we created a concept we call dynamic metadata, where we put one identifier on every data object, and that identifier went into a separate system, a big graph, where we could add any annotations that were needed, including ongoing confidence or relevance or corrections or all kinds of things. That concept I brought with me into banking, and it helped a lot. And I remember talking to my boss at BNY Mellon, Joe Sikowski, about their metadata solutions. And he said, we got metadata. I said, no, you have static metadata, which is essential, but you don't have dynamic metadata. And he's like, what in the world? And I told him, I said, look, at the agency, we would steal data from some other country, right? That's what they do. And then we would bring it in, and you're looking at it and you'd say, these identifiers are supposed to be unique, but they're not. We can't go back to that country's leader and say, your unique identifiers aren't unique. Can you please fix your data so we can steal it again? You just have to deal with it, right? But the funny thing is sometimes when you find identifiers that aren't unique and the system creates them uniquely, that's a big signal. It's like, oh, somebody added this identifier, probably for some intelligence purpose, right? Here's a new document that has the same number as the old document, but it's modified in a certain way, right? That has intelligence value, may have intelligence value. And if you, right? So you have to add that information and have the ability for other experts when they see it to add more information. And so when you have some final result, you can unwrap it all the way back to the source elements. That whole concept came from Jeff Jonas, right? And Jeff, I think, did that because he was doing business for casinos, and they weren't very forgiving if you got it wrong. So he had to be able to explain to them
Yeah.
his answer. Here's why we kicked out this guy from your casino. He isn't just your brother-in-law, he's also cheating, right? It's like, what?
Right.
Stuff like that. So these were important things that I think we're taking them forward at my company with an application we call agentic metadata, which is the same baseline. We can add more metadata dynamically to anything. And now we want to actually have the AI be able to add metadata as it goes. So we want the AI to be able to ask itself questions like, here's my conclusion. How do I test if it's a hallucination, right? Can you build into the AI the scientific method to say, what would disprove this? And can I find evidence that would validate the disproof? And so that I know it's an hallucination. What I'm trying to do is take the hallucination problem and turn it upside down. There's a Dr. Philip Sagan I worked with who said it's a chance to make artificial creativity. If you can take hallucinations and say, actually, we want to double down and have the AI create things that no one would have created and then test them scientifically, right? Maybe and there's some things like, gene folding and stuff like that where we're seeing those kinds of things, but can we see it in other areas? So all of these things just give you a foundation to work from. And back then it wasn't called data science. It was just called big data. And we were just nerds, trying to help the real, operators.
Yeah. And had a common thread from that story to me seems like twofold. One, transparency into when you're making changes, annotate them so that you can trace everything back. You're not getting like this modified data set that's going to give you something totally different. It's
Absolutely.
How did you get here? Because you're basically documenting your assumptions as you go and being able to prove like this changed here. If somebody audited you or looked back at it, why did you do this? Well, here are the reasons. We can go all the way back to the original data set.
Yeah. When we made this decision, there was uncertainty and this is our assumptions. And they say, but that was wrong. I said, we know that now, right? But back then, this was what we thought was true. And another reasonable person at that point would have agreed. In fact, they did. Here's their annotations.
With your work with Angularis AI, how important is this transparency and traceability, especially?
Essential.
And I know
it's like essentially important.
Yeah. And especially, I know. No, go please.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah.
Go
No. I'll let you finish the question.
No, I was just going to kind of tie it to kind of the regulatory environment at the moment. And obviously, at federal level, it's very interesting at the moment. But at the state level, you have very different states putting forward pretty comprehensive regulation around AI. You have the Colorado Consumer AI Act, the Purple State, California just passed a bunch last year, including AB 2013, which is about generative AI transparency around training data and things like that. And then Texas probably has the most comprehensive at the moment. And Governor Abbott just signed it 4 days ago, the Texas Responsible AI Governance Act, which is somewhat modeled on the EU AI Act. So, yeah, I'm curious at Angularis AI, transparency, traceability, and now with varying states of different, political places on the spectrum, they're all focused on this. So, yeah, how important is traceability and transparency in what you're doing at Angularis?
It's essential, but it's not enough. We're pushing now on a sort of a double click into that. There's a team we're working with that may invest in us, and they've said, what's more meaningful, right? Our Angularis sort of story is about we can help you make your model risk management and governance reliable, dependable, help you pass your audits well, make sure your models are continually performing to spec. And we've added metrics for difficult to measure things beyond just performance, precision, recall, Briar score. There's metrics like, is it explainable? Is it transparent? How can you measure those things? That's very hard, by the way. And so we're trying to create a not-for-profit group we call Excellence in AI, EXAI. And I don't know, Elon Musk might have EXAI, and we won't be able to keep that. But
anything with an X in it. Anything with an X in it.
But there needs to be somebody that's not us that defines what ethical means, so that we can build measurements that measure it. Because an ethic is just a metric to the good. But it's the question is to who's good. And this is where the double click came in. Is if you're just helping the bank be ethical comply with rules, pass their audit, that's a good thing. It saves them money, helps them deliver AI, makes them more productive, all kind of good things there. But who's looking out for the consumer? Who's looking out for the client? Well, a lot of these laws, especially in banking laws, say you have to provide notice. The client has to agree. There's all these things you have to sign. They have to know the API. They have to know all these different things. But the truth of the matter is, most normal people just aren't that aware of the financial details. You're taking out a loan, and I don't know if you've done this lately, but you sign a lot of things that even if you sat there and read them, you're not really sure. There's a certain element of trust. You say, I've been working with this team. The bankers are good. They're audited. All these things. They're not going to have me sign something that hurts me. There's a trust there, but inside, you're saying, I hope I'm not signing away something that's going to be important to me later, right? And so why not have the AI also look out for the consumer's interest too? The AI can look at the problem from both perspectives, right? From three, really. The financial institution's perspective to say, is this legal, ethical, compliant, all that kind of stuff. The auditing group's perspective of, can we validate that they're doing everything right? So if we give them credentials, we're not responsible for failure. But how about the consumer says, this thing I'm agreeing to is actually the best fiduciary option for me, right? The AI has said, I'm getting the best deal, right? AI can make sure everybody's doing things the way they should in an ethical way and to everybody's benefit. Even if you have somebody who maybe puts profit ahead of other concerns, the AI won't let that get out of control, right? That's kind of where we're trying to go now. So Angularis started as a way to provide a managed service that I wish had been available to me at the bank when I was doing this. If there had been a company like Angularis, it would have been a lot easier for me to do my job. I would have just hired them and said, build our bottle inventory, build our metrics, track it, show me, track our whole life cycle, all those things. You wouldn't have had to build our own. We could have just done that. Didn't exist, right? When I left the bank, I said, you know what, that should exist. Let's make that. I think we can sell it. But now we're looking at saying, that's great, and it should be a profitable business, but we can actually do something that's not just helpful, but meaningful. And that's where we're thinking right now. And it's a little bit fuzzy, but I like the idea of, can we, instead of being afraid of the AI, can we make the AI our tool to help us be less afraid of each other? Like the AI is looking out for all of us. And to do that, you asked about how important is transparency and explainability. I think that's the key, right? Is when it makes a decision, can I open up that decision and say, how did we get to this decision? I want to be able to do that whenever there's a decision, enough till I get to the point where I say, I'm confident that this decision is going to be like the other ones I double clicked on and follow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you've always been very forward looking, but even when you were at BNY Mellon, you won a Platinum Innovation Award. And I know you talked about, hey, I wish we had, kind of what I'm doing now, which is probably one of the reasons you kind of started Angularis. But BNY Mellon, it's about 240-year-old institution.
Yeah, started by Alexander Hamilton.
That's right. So what was the secret, or how did you drive innovation there at a company or an organization that has centuries of, hey, this is the way we've always done things. This is how we do it. How do you bring a new innovation and push them to change?
I think part of it is it's a hard thing, right? And there was a book I read years ago by, I'll think of his name in a minute, but it's called Dealing with Darwin. I think it's Michael Green, Stephen Green. I can get you the author's name. But he has this graph in there that I've used many times where he shows if you're trying to optimize your IT investment for the best value, right? You get the most for the least amount of money. The curve has a peak over here, like in value to money, you get the most out of it. If you're trying to optimize for the best innovation, it's a different peak, right? It's a different place because to innovate, you have to take risk. You have to do things that don't pan out, right? And so companies want to be innovative, but they also want to be efficient, and they have this sort of these two driving forces. And the author put those on the same graph, and it showed that the two barely intersect, right? This is peak efficiency and this is peak innovation, but there's a little area here. And too many organizations go, we're going to focus on the optimal for both, which is really suboptimal for both, right? You're not very efficient and you're not very innovative, and that's doomed, right? So what you have to do is have two different programs. One that's the goal is to innovate, and there's things you have to do there to keep it from killing you, from using up all your resources. And then you have to have another group that's about innovation, and that the team that's working on this needs to allow both of those two things to optimize themselves. But the goal of the innovation side needs to be to get things into the optimization side as soon as they can. That was the point of his book. And I remember showing that diagram many times when I was in that fight, and they say, this isn't how we should do it. What you're proposing isn't the way this is done. And I was like, yeah, but this is a better way to do it. We just don't know that yet, right? And so it would allow you to carve some resources out to do it. And at a bank like BNY Mellon, where there's literally trillions of dollars a day being transacted, the efficiency and the reliability and the sort of perfect operations it's not debatable. It just has to be perfect, right? And they're very, very good at that. Any of the major banks have had to perfect that. I showed up and I'm working in the AI side of things to get sort of credibility and get some resource and be allowed to innovate. You sort of have to help with this side for a while, to where they say, okay, we believe that you understand our mission and that you're contributing to it, and you're not just sort of a mad scientist over here doing something that doesn't matter, right? And then you wait for the opportunity where you see a problem they're wrestling with over here, and you go, I can think of a way to solve that problem. And then you go solve the problem and come back and say, does this help, right? If you get a couple of those little wins, pretty soon they start coming to you for solutions, right? And there's that. And then the other thing is dealing with the regulators. The regulatory constraint on, especially on large banks, is a large burden for good reason, right? And there's a lot of fear is a word you could use. We don't like to talk about being afraid of the regulators, but they have a lot of power, right? And so when you go into those audits, you really want to pass, right? You want to come out of it with no findings, which doesn't happen often because the auditors are rewarded by finding problems, right? And so they're super motivated to find them. And all of that context is sort of the same thing. When you can set up a partnership with the auditors, just like setting up a partnership with the optimizers, where the auditors see that you care about the thing that they care about as much as they care about it, right? And you can say, my motivations for caring about this goes beyond, I just want to pass your audit. My motivation is because the thing you're auditing for is important, and I want the same outcome you're after. The reason for your regulations is important, just as important to me. If you can establish that trust with the auditors, you actually can do much better. It's like in the audit, there's nothing where it's open kimono. Here's this honest situation. Here's where we're having a problem and things aren't as good as we want. Here's where we're doing something novel. Here's where we're doing something risky, and here's our mitigations to manage the risk. If you can establish that relationship, you get a lot more latitude. And you've established it when those auditors call you back later to ask questions about somebody else they're auditing, where they're saying, we're looking at somebody else, we can't tell you who, but they're telling us this. Is that reasonable? When you get that kind of relationship going, then you have a partnership going. Yeah. And I think that's the most productive situation. And so Bridget, who was the CIO at the bank at the time, now she's at Wells Fargo, when she recognized me for that award, I think it wasn't as much about the actual innovations I accomplished. I think it was about the partnerships that were fostered that caused things to improve. And we did some cool things that nobody had done. We had a lot of fun, right? And worked hard. But that recognition was about that. And it's an important thing to do to recognize that, because your innovators sometimes are viewed as disruptors and can be a pain in the butt. I know I was to some people because I'm very impatient. An award like that gives you a little bit of protection, right? When you show up and they say, I'm actually here to help you, and I've helped others, and they gave me this fancy award, and I have this cool little plaque, whatever. It adds to your credibility. So it takes a while to get there. It took a few years of sort of taking on impossible challenges and making enough headway to make an impact. Does that make sense? It's a long answer. I'm sorry.
It's more of a leadership and process award about how you went about doing that and doing it the right way. And obviously innovation, like you're saying, it's risky. It's not a linear progress. It's all over the place.
We talk about, you need to be disruptive. It's like, no, disruption is disruptive. It's like revolution is revolting, right? It's like, no, those can be consequences, but you can mitigate those, right? You can do it in a way that's less expensive and doesn't use up your personal capital, fighting.
Well, tell me about, like you said, you were a pain in the butt to some people, but tell me about a career decision that looked like maybe a mistake at the time, but it turned out to be formative, or you learned from it. Is there something you look back on, hey, that was a mistake, but at least I learned something from it?
Well, I've been told by a few people who became good friends over time that when they first worked with me, they thought I was a bully. And that was that was hard because I don't want to be a bully. I don't like bullies. And I remember when they told me that, I was like, what? Oh no. You know what? Why did you think I was a bully? And it turns out it was when I was trying to get people to see things my way, sometimes I didn't leave a lot of room for them to rebut it. And that can be hard to do, especially when you're in a hurry. And it's like, okay, we've looked at this every way. I think we're done debating. Let's just do this. And finding the right time to sort of take over the whiteboard marker and say, here's how we're going to do it, can be hard. And there's some people who aren't where you are yet, who, when you cut them off, they feel bullied, right? And I think this goes back to leadership versus manipulation. If they feel manipulated, it wasn't very good leadership. And there's been a few times where I've done things like that, and looking back on it, I'm kind of ashamed of the way I handled myself. It's like I wish I could go back and do it better, but I have to remind myself that I was a stupider, younger, dumber person then, and I would do it differently today. But those are the failures and the risks, and most of the failures that I regret are things that discouraged somebody else. That's what I hate to do. So
yeah, the interpersonal stuff is challenging, and I think like good leaders give space for debate, for dissent, to do it in the right way, and like always trying to get to the right answer. And I think when you're a very mission driven person, sometimes you can get that tunnel vision and be like, we got to go here. And it can be hard to kind of look around a little bit. But the self-awareness to be able to reflect on that and say, hey, how can I be a better leader, and, merge these things together, because not everybody has the same personality. And I think that interpersonal stuff, and, I worry about that in the age of AI. And that's kind of why I asked you that question early on in the meeting of how do you collaborate and talk to folks, because those soft skills are still so critical and will be so critical. I don't think that's ever going to change.
The soft skills are the hardest skills. And, I read a lot. I'm constantly, in fact, one of my interview questions that asks people, how many books are you reading right now? Because I'm looking for people who have like 10 or 15 books open that they're reading at a time, because they have things they need to know and there's things they're interested in. And it's kind of a ADD problem that could be a huge advantage if you apply it. Since I read a lot, I can recommend a lot of books. And so when I'm talking to somebody and I'm trying to get them to think a particular way or think about a solution with an open mind, a lot of times I'll say, you know what, I got this idea from this book, this chapter in this book. There's a great book, Digital Transformation by Tom Siebel, right? It's a wonderful book. He does a great job of explaining the whole transformation, but there's like 2 chapters in there that are solid gold. There's like the 10 things for the CEO to know, and the architecture, the AI architecture. I think I bought, if Tom's a bestseller, it's because I bought so many of his books and given him. right? And I'll
I
say,
have to, yeah.
yeah, so read this chapter, and then let's talk about the decision. So that's a technique I've used a lot, and I think that came from anti-patterns, because some of the feedback from anti-patterns, one young man came to me and said, my company was doing something really stupid, and I could see it was stupid, but my boss wasn't having it, right? Didn't want to hear about it. So I went in one day with your book and I said, I think we're doing this anti-pattern, right? And he said, what? And he said, and since it was in a book written by somebody else, it had just enough of credibility where he could read it. And he read it and he saw where it would head, right? He said, oh, I don't want that outcome. And it fixed the problem. They made some changes. And so a book by somebody other than you can be a very powerful tool to help somebody, because otherwise there's this personal thing of like, it's my brain versus your brain. And when you say, this isn't even my idea, I got it from Tom Siebel's book right here, right? That helps a lot. It softens the sort of interpersonal battle. It can just take it off the table. It's like, this isn't about me versus you. This is about us trying to find the right answer. And I'm pretty confident I'm on the right answer, and here's why, but I could be wrong. See what there's that. And I think Stu Bailey did that Idiot's Guide to
Model Operations. Yeah, Model Operation, which is, from Wiley. Yep.
Yeah, that book was so powerful to me, because I was trying to get the bank to make some pretty big changes to how they did model risk management, because we needed to make it go faster. They were dealing with statistical models that they could have 6 guys with, PhDs with more degrees than a thermometer, and give them 6 months to study it and make sure it's all perfect. And we're saying, well, if you get this model approved, we're going to retrain and it's going to be different in a week. And they're like, we can't review a model every week. It's like, we need to change the way we do things. And it was like, Skip, you just don't know how banking works. And I was like, that may be true, but I can see that this isn't. But with Stu's book, I could say, you're probably right. Take a look at, I think it's chapter 9 in Stu's book, and see what you think. And it would be amazing. They would come back and they say, okay, do what you're going to do. It makes sense, right? And so, that's one of the Stu's huge, meaningful contributions to this whole space. I'll be forever grateful for that book. And it's what, 100 pages. It's not even a difficult read.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of great info in there. And I mean, you can have all the technology in the world, brightest minds, but unless you can kind of sometimes put ego aside and convince people and advocate for these ideas in a way that puts ego aside and makes everybody kind of come along for the ride, like partner with them, as you would say, that's how you get to a good decision. That's how you actually get good decisions.
I bet
matter
even otherwise. Einstein would talk about Fermi thinks this, rather than saying, I'm Einstein, shut up and do what I say. I bet he even said, yeah, I have my opinions, but it's based upon Oppenheimer said this, or Fermi said that, or whatever. That's kind of, I think that's a good leadership technique is, and if the book doesn't exist, go ahead and write it.
Yeah. The psychology of good decisions. That'd be a good
funny
one
story. When we set up to do anti-patterns, we knew we had to read every book on the topic. There was a list of maybe 40 books that were relevant to what we were daring to write. And so the 4 of us set up a Thursday evening beers and darts at a local bar near MITRE, where we would meet. And every week,
where was it? Wait, was this up in Boston, like at Hanscom Air Force Base, or was this?
It was in the DC area. MITRE's Washington.
DC, you're down to DC. Okay.
And so we set up this thing, and we sort of like a book club, right? So we have to read these books, and there's more books to read than all of us can read together. So let's read them to each other. So we would say, you read this book, you read the first 2 chapters of this book, and we just sort of test them out. And then we would show up, order drinks, and play darts while each of us told each other what they had read. And so over the course of about a year, we went through all these books and discussed them with there was, I want to say, 6 or 8 of us. Well, maybe more. The 4 authors and 6 or 8 others that all became pretty good friends. Fast forward a few years later, Anti-Patterns was out. It was successful. We did 2 more Anti-Patterns books, and almost everybody else who was part of that book club is also a published author now. And it was wow. It was like, if you want to write books, you got to read them. And then you got to believe that you could write something that people would want to read. And that was, I mean, I think they watched us. They go, these guys are stupid and they got a book. We could, you know?
Skip can do it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So,
that's amazing.
so I believe in collaboration. In fact, we also met Saturday mornings to every Saturday morning to work on whatever chapters we work on and hand them off. And I remember a lot of times working all night Friday night because I had something that was due and I didn't want to disappoint my co-authors and be the laggard. If I had tried to write that book by myself, it would never have gotten written, even if it could have been written, because I would have given myself permission to sleep instead of working all night. So collaboration.
Yeah, I think that's one of kind of the core challenges now, especially in the tech world, of like collaboration, bouncing those ideas in a positive way with each other. And when you're over Zoom or
risking your reputation on a promised result to somebody else whose opinion of you care about, that's important.
Yeah.
I think that comes from military leadership. There's a lot of that. Even as a plebe at the Naval Academy, that you could never build your classmate. If you knew the answer and your classmate got it wrong and they asked you the answer, you weren't supposed to give the right answer. You would ask for permission not to build your classmate because you don't want to make your peers look bad if you can avoid it. Those are important leadership and team building skills. The academy experience is about learning how to be a team in a difficult environment. And they make it as
what do you hope?
As they can.
Yeah, no, they do. And I think that but being able to operate under those, high pressure, ambiguous situations, like once you can do that, and then when you come to, less stressful, everything's it slows down, it's easier. Yeah. But what do you hope people say in 10 years about the decisions now that you're making with Angularis and what you're doing in this kind of transformational AI period? What do you hope people are going to say about what you're doing right now, 10 years from now?
That it was helpful, useful. That's kind of the goal. It's like, did it matter?
Well, one final question for you. When you're making a good decision or celebrating a good decision or processing a difficult one, is there a go-to drink or recipe or food that you go to celebrate with others?
That's a dangerous question for me because I've struggled with weight my whole life. I enjoy eating. My favorite go-to food is fish and chips, and my wife doesn't eat seafood, so we only ever get it when we go out. But to go with it, I like a Guinness. And after my cancer, I can't drink alcohol anymore, so I've switched to the no alcohol Guinness, and I vouch for it. It tastes like Guinness, and it's just as satisfying. It goes great with fish and chips, especially with mushy peas. So I recommend it. My mother's English, so I grew up eating fish and chips and with lots of vinegar. So that's my go-to meal. But there's not many foods I would turn my nose up at. It's a challenge. If you like food as much as I do, it's a challenge not to overindulge.
Yeah. Well, I love fish and chips, and I know in Annapolis, I was actually recently there. My sister lives in Virginia. Went to Annapolis. There's some good fish and chips places down there. Appreciate the food guidance. That's it. Thank you so much for your time. We covered a lot of ground, and you've clearly made a lot of good decisions in your life and career. So thank you for sharing it and joining us today.
I enjoyed it. It was good. It's a good time.